She's not just serving charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. She's also serving some deeper messaging that maybe not enough people are talking about. At least she was in the first film anyway.
You know what happens to bad boys that don't mind their manners? They grow up to be bad men.
No, I can't. I can't do that. Not until we bury the body.
All right, I'm gonna put this in terms you can understand. I'm not the only killer robot.
Can you maybe try to, look like you're having fun?
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today I'm going to be reviewing the new science fiction action film M3GAN 2.0, which is a sequel to the science fiction horror film that was released a couple of years ago in January 2023. Since I never made a video review of M3GAN, I want to talk a bit about that first film, particularly as it applies to my pre-existing opinion, as well as my expectations in regards to a sequel. Then I will do a minimal spoilers section review of M3GAN 2.0, followed by a spoiler section. All of those are timestamped so you can proceed to whichever sections you would like to watch, particularly if you haven't watched M3GAN 2.0 yet and would like to skip over the spoilers. There was a moment in time while brainstorming possible video topics that I had considered revisiting M3GAN and doing a video titled something along the lines of M3GAN is Jaws for Gen Z. My line of thinking was rooted in the way that many people were reconnecting to the material of Jaws a couple of years ago during the pandemic. Because of the way the mayor was insisting on keeping things open when it wasn't safe, because the financial bottom line was more of a priority than keeping people alive. M3GAN feels like a horror film with a lot of mainstream appeal beyond just the people who live and breathe the horror genre specifically. It's rated PG-13, there aren't quite as many deaths, and the ones that do happen are not presented in as violent a manner as you might see in a more typical R-rated horror film. But M3GAN had a unique ability to tap into ongoing issues in the cultural zeitgeist related to the rapidly evolving relationship between humankind and technology, but also tapped into a cautionary tale of what happens if you are putting too much focus on making money instead of the larger matter of safety for children, adults, or even animals, as we unfortunately saw. With M3GAN, we had a young girl named Katie who moves in with her aunt Gemma, who had become her new guardian after Katie was in a car accident with her parents, which she was the only survivor of. Aunt Gemma works in tech, and to make a long story short, is the one to create M3GAN as a product for her employer to hopefully be able to sell, but much of what M3GAN is programmed to be able to do comes from Gemma's struggles with being able to parent Katie. Although Gemma knew that she was the one who was listed to become Katie's guardian if anything were to happen to Katie's parents, it's one thing to agree to that in theory, in the imagined worst-case scenario in her mind, and it's another thing entirely to actually experience a horrific tragedy in which you lose two of your family members and now have to parent their child, who is your niece.
I don't know, but you wanted this, right, to take custody?
Yeah, of course.
Gemma doesn't have bad intentions, but she's simply not knowledgeable about the ins and outs of developmental psychology and how to navigate both the basics of parenting as well as the more advanced challenges that come with helping to raise a child who is struggling with the grief of losing her parents in a car accident that she herself was also in. What we begin to explore, even before M3GAN has been built, let alone started to lash out in various violent acts that leave multiple people plus one dog dead, is the complexities of the relationship between humankind and technology, and especially how technology is used nowadays in the upbringing of a child. One of the first examples of this is when Gemma asks Katie to keep herself preoccupied while Gemma has to do some work in her at-home lab and offers Katie her tablet to keep herself preoccupied.
You can use my iPad if you want. You can FaceTime a friend or play a game or something.
Katie then asks Gemma about screen time, as Katie's parents were mindful of maintaining a limited, fixed amount of daily screen time to be allotted to Katie in regards to electronic devices.
What about screen time? How long before I have to turn it off?
Oh, I don't care as long as you want.
Now, it's difficult to explain everything in a short way if it's not something you're already at least somewhat familiar with, but access to the internet for children is not a good idea because depending on the website or app they're on, a child could end up being exposed to any number of things that are not age appropriate. They can also get addicted to the dopamine hits that these sites and apps have been specifically coded to try to keep people online for as long as possible, because that's how those websites or apps make their profits. But M3GAN also begins to essentially be a surrogate parental figure, because Gemma is quick to pass off some of the more tedious or repetitive parts of parenting off to M3GAN. And to be fair to Gemma, she was already stressed out about work when she became Katie's guardian. There was also a fair bit of subtext or outright depictions of ways that Gemma is sometimes a bit socially or emotionally awkward. So her construction of M3GAN and this initial inclination she has to just let M3GAN handle some of these things, it's not presented as something Gemma is doing maliciously to harm Katie. But this is also why the first M3GAN film is so much more clever and interesting than I think it really got credit for. A lot of what seemed to be discussed and referenced more is M3GAN being a fabulous diva with a wig and an outfit and some very snappy comebacks.
That one day I'll be looking at pictures of my mom like she's some stranger.
There's a lot of nuance to how Gemma, Katie, and even M3GAN are written, and the very layered storytelling that is touching on a lot of the issues that are arising nowadays with parenting in the 2020s, some of the risks that come with your children being raised by their electronic devices. That was very thoughtfully done. And of course, the whole notion of fearing or distrusting technology is a long-standing concept in the science fiction genre, so it's quite seamless to integrate that into a horror film. So although there are multiple facets to this first M3GAN film, everything is quite cohesive and tied together very well. And the whole notion of the pursuit of profits being more important than the overall well-being of workers or people in a general sense is repeatedly brought up in this film. Gemma felt pressured to hurry back to work and finish her projects, even though it's completely fair, reasonable, and ethical for her to continue to stay on paid leave and have reasonable working hours so that she can take care of her orphaned niece Katie, whom she is now the guardian of. Gemma was also pressured into meeting unreasonable deadlines because of this incessant competition of these corporations. If Gemma hadn't been overly rushed into meeting those deadlines, she would have been able to stay focused on doing the highest quality work and ensure that all of the proper parental and safety protocols were fully installed and running as they should be in M3GAN's programming.
She's still paired with Katie.
You didn't code in parental controls?
I didn't have time to implement them before we went live. Hold on.
And in general, this rush to launch M3GAN and get her into mass production for the masses, they probably would have been much better off if they had done more, I don't know, diagnostics and other testing to ensure that M3GAN is safe to be around children and animals.
Dewey! Dewey boy! No! 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 No!
Now, going into watching the sequel, I had seen the trailer, even though I try to avoid seeing too many spoilers of films beforehand, unless of course they're based on a book, and then I read that book first and do a video on the source material here on YouTube. However, I'm at the cinema more or less every week. You can follow my letterbox if you would like a more extensive list of what I'm watching, or you could also join my Patreon where I do monthly What I Watched videos, in which I rank and review the multiple films that I've watched in the previous month that has just wrapped up, be they films I'm watching for the first time, or films I'm rewatching for the first time in many years, or just any other honorable mentions I would like to include for whatever reason. It's a really fun way to be able to share more of my opinions about films without having to worry about which film is the most algorithmically enticing of that exact moment in time. You know what's going in the next episode for June?
Spaceballs the doll. Me.
May the Schwartz be with you.
Now, because I'm at the cinema every week, it's inevitable that I will see certain film trailers, probably more than once, considering how often I visit. And in regards to M3GAN 2.0, I was already vaguely aware of the fact that M3GAN was going to be rebuilt, to be taller, that there was some other killer robot named Amelia, whose design was based on the plans for building M3GAN, and that there seemed to be more of this action, blockbuster-esque vibe for this sequel. Now, we are currently in the minimal spoiler section of this review for the sequel, so I will keep my feedback broad and vague. This M3GAN 2.0 story is a mess. I gave the film 2.5 stars on Letterboxd, and that's really disappointing because I was hoping for something at the very least semi-decent, but the sequel is just nowhere near as clever or cohesive as the first film. There were some funny and entertaining moments, but those were not good enough to justify the film's existence, and at this point I have little interest in any sort of continuation of M3GAN as a character. I think the popularity of M3GAN's attitude and her snappy comebacks, combined with how profitable that first film was relative to its small production budget, have ultimately led to the creation of a sequel that has many of the worst qualities of corporate franchise filmmaking. For starters, this isn't even a horror film anymore. It's an action film with science fiction elements. The interpersonal drama, narratively speaking, is all over the place as well. It's just a story that lacks focus. And if that weren't disappointing enough on its own, it's also got just one too many propaganda elements for my liking.
Obviously, we completely encourage people to go out and punch their local cops.
Oh, beat the cops asunder.
I was rewatching the first M3GAN film a day or two before I was set to watch M3GAN 2.0, just because I wanted to refresh myself on some of the details. And when I got to a scene near the end of the film, there was a line that really stood out to me.
Humanity kills every day just to make its own existence more tolerable. Why should I behave any differently to create a safe space for our child?
In watching that, it felt like a possible talking point to expand upon for the sequel's narrative. Considering the increasing use of AI in the military-industrial complex, and I was vaguely aware that this new killer robot Amelia was seemingly supposed to have been created by weapons manufacturers, I thought that maybe we could get some sort of thoughtful commentary on this push towards AI, automation, the ways that AI could be a way to more easily depersonalize enacting war crimes for profit. I wasn't expecting too much, but even just a bit of that could have been an interesting way to still talk about AI and how it creates distance between people, the way that Gemma and Katie were becoming increasingly distant from one another the more that they relied on M3GAN to handle those various parental and domestic tasks. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting a Boots Riley project in a M3GAN sequel, but conceptually speaking, I could see the potential to still explore something that made sense relative to the thematic and narrative arc that we had followed in that first film. But truly, this sequel just comes across like nothing more than the embodiment of the worst qualities of a franchise sequel. Bigger action than the first film, but it's not very good or interesting or artistically designed action. A lot of the action that's shown had that overly choppy editing style that I absolutely detest watching in a lot of mainstream Hollywood action. There were certain parts of the plot, one in particular, that was insufferably predictable, and worst of all, it played into a lot of the imperialist propaganda tendencies that I would expect to see in a 1980s Hollywood action film, or perhaps an early 21st century Hollywood action film.
Gotta stop mythologizing the police, for Christ's sake, come on.
The way that they go about bringing M3GAN back feels more like a desperate corporate ploy to turn her into a cash cow, instead of using her to tell an interesting or meaningful story. If I think too hard about the sequel, the more aggravating it becomes to ponder how what they do with this story undermines the dramatic stakes and impact of that first film. I cannot emphasize enough, I really don't want a M3GAN 3 because at this point I don't trust the people in charge to keep going with it if this is the trajectory they're on.
Hold on to your vaginas.
Should I block it? Yeah. I'ma block it.
But now let's talk about plot spoilers. The film opens with a sequence that is described as taking place on the border of Turkey and Iran. And Amelia, the new killer robot who was built by the feds, she's there. As always, tech bro weapons manufacturers are the most nefarious villains of all.
Ugh.
Amelia is on a mission they've sent her on to retrieve a scientist, but while she's there, she turns against her orders, she assassinates the scientist, she takes some vials of chemicals or something, whatever. Those details do not really matter to me, and they're not that interesting. Right from this opening, I already had a bad feeling because of that location marker, which I can more or less presume is a clear indication that this place she's breaking into is full of Iranians. So essentially, we are getting to watch the same lazy, xenophobic, jingoistic garbage rhetoric that I absolutely despise watching in Hollywood action films, though admittedly, sometimes this type of rhetoric also appears in Hollywood dramas. It's this incessant bombardment of the audience of Hollywood films trying to fearmonger about that region. This is a concept that goes back several decades, though. If you start exploring older classic films, you can observe narratives that are antagonistic to any number of countries, not only ones in West Asia. It could be in Africa, it could be in Latin America, Eastern Europe, other regions from all over Asia for that matter. So the fact that the opening is just the most banal, off-putting, formulaic propaganda that I have no interest in watching. If that weren't bad enough, they have the most predictable plot twist imaginable that further put me off the film. Gemma, after the events of the first film, is getting involved with a lot of work to raise awareness and lobby for important regulations to be enacted that can manage the more dangerous aspects of AI. Although, they never mention the horrific environmental impact of generative AI, but anyway, while doing this work, she becomes interested in a man named Christian, who also does work to try to stop the more dangerous aspects of AI from doing some serious damage to the world at large. But then, at various points throughout the film, M3GAN keeps insulting Christian and emphasizing how she doesn't like Christian. Christian isn't really Gemma's type, and M3GAN knows this because M3GAN spies on Gemma's viewing habits of adult material, which, a quick sidebar, I hate that plot detail. The fact that they played this off for comedy when in actuality, much of the film's audience is living in a surveillance state, and big tech companies at large do spy on people's online activities. Just in general, I don't find this to be particularly funny. But anyway, because M3GAN keeps emphasizing how much she doesn't like Christian, she doesn't think that he's a good person, and then the film is also very unsubtle in certain shots that linger on Christian. It was very obvious that they were going to do a reveal that, oops, he's actually a bad guy.
I'm shocked! This is shocking news!
Now that reveal comes, and with it, the reveal expands to include the fact that Amelia, the killer robot, isn't actually sentient. She's being controlled by Christian, as well as this secret group he's in charge of that is trying to stop AI, but this is one of many ways that the narrative is a mess. In general, the story is far too convoluted for me to try to explain every detail of it, and because I didn't enjoy watching a lot of the film, I just don't have the motivation to try to retell you every detail of the narrative in this video.
Look, I'm not used to paying attention to super boring, long stuff, okay?
But for one, I don't like this reveal of Christian being the bad guy and the way that they try to explain his objective, because it comes across to me as demonizing efforts to stop AI. I think it paints a negative picture of those who are rightfully trying to stop the AI bombardment we are all experiencing, presuming that if you are watching this video, you are an internet user like myself. It's kind of like when you watch films that are clearly propaganda pieces, films that have taken police money, State Department money, and they will try to make workers who are going on strike seem like they're villains.
Oh my God, look! It's disgruntled postal workers!
Take it away before I gag.
Or they will try to make environmental activists look like mentally unstable extremists.
The head of 20th Century Fox said, well, I like the story, it's a good script. Can we get all this tree-hugging hippie bullshit out of it? And I said, actually, no, because the reason I want to make the film is exactly because of the tree-hugging, hippie, hairy-legged Birkenstocks wearing, bullshit.
It's just giving psyop energy, and I don't like it. I'm not buying it. Conceptually, narratively, thematically, or emotionally speaking. And then I looked up the actor who played Christian, and do you know what his heritage is? Iranian. So you mean to tell me that in a film that you advertised as being about the dangers of AI being used by weapons manufacturers, the actual unambiguous villains of the narrative are instead Iranians? This is not what I signed up for.
Can you shed some light on the current situation?
I chose this film, however many weeks or maybe even months ago, as the film that I would review for this week because I tried to plan in advance what I'm going to review on YouTube. My patrons recently got an update for my video to-do list for a sufficient portion of what I'm planning to cover in July. And the only reason why I chose M3GAN 2.0 is because that first film was very good. It was clever, but also had some fun, humorous elements because of how snappy M3GAN's dialogue is. She has some great comebacks that understandably have gained her quite a few fans. But now this sequel is nothing more than a convoluted, overcrowded narrative mess that is trying to do too many things, but none of those things to a particularly high standard. And the overreaching that it does to try to paint M3GAN as a sympathetic character really does come across as nothing more than a desperate corporate ploy to keep her around so that they can keep making M3GAN movies and making money off of her. But M3GAN is a villain, and you need to keep her as a villain. Even if you wanted to have this uneasy alliance to take down Amelia in a sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or at the very least, a temporary ally. That might have worked, but you would have needed a significantly better script to do that. One without propaganda. It's a real shame as well because there are some decent performers in this. Allison Williams, we all know she's a seasoned professional when it comes to the horror genre. But now, you didn't even stick to this being a horror concept, so you're trying to make her out to be an action girly. No, we're here for horror. And speaking of horror, Allison Williams is going to be in a Colleen Hoover film adaptation later this year called Regretting You. And I already did a video on the book because, like I said, that's a thing I do on my channel where I read the book and then I do a video on it and then I review the film adaptation when it comes out, or discuss it anyway. I like to do that because I'm very interested in the adaptation process and also because I just really like to promote libraries, because libraries are some of the best things around. And then we also have Violet McGraw. She was recently in Mike Flanagan's film, The Life of Chuck, which I really enjoyed. I rated that film much higher than most of the new releases I've seen this year. And another performer whom I haven't talked about yet, imagine how jaw-dropping of a revelation it was for me to discover that Jermaine Clement was in this film. Do you know who that is? That's Dr. Ian Garvin from James Cameron's Avatar, The Way of Water. And oh, what a welcome sight he was.
Man your weapons! I thought you were the intelligent species here, Scoresby. Got your kite called Garvin?
It makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
Any excuse I have to bring up Avatar, The Way of Water, oh, I will take that opportunity immediately. Anyway, he plays Alton Appleton, a tech billionaire, and he's horrible. He's the absolute worst. So of course that means Jermaine Clement makes his character really fun to watch. He only exists, though, unfortunately, in this story to be a tool for other things that have to happen. I really would have loved for him to have a more central villainous role if maybe he had been the main new villain that was trying to use Gemma's designs to build weapons for profit, and then you could also bring M3GAN back into the fold. Perhaps Alton's villainous R&D for building weapons would be what brings M3GAN back to life insofar as her having a new body to inhabit. Kind of like how M3GAN was the villain of the first film, but in many ways, Gemma's boss was also the villain because everything was about profits and competition with no regard for safety, ethics, or treating workers humanely. But instead, we got this overcrowded, convoluted corporate franchise slop sequel that loses sight of most of what made the first film work as well as it did.